He was my boyfriend, until he saw my sister. We were lying on the couch, feet tangled, half watching something neither of us cared about. Ryan's hand rested on my ankle, warm and familiar. The apartment smelled like the laundry I'd folded earlier, clean cotton and lavender detergent. This was my favorite kind of evening. No plans, no pressure. Just us existing in the same space, comfortable enough not to fill every silence. "This is nice," I'd said, more to myself than to him. Ryan had hummed in agreement, eyes on the screen. I'd looked around our small living room, the book stacked on the coffee table, the blanket we'd bought together last winter, the framed photo from our trip to the coast. Everything felt settled, solid. I remembered thinking, this is it. This is what I wanted. Not fireworks or grand gestures, just this quiet certainty that we'd built something real. Ryan shifted, pulling me closer. I'd tucked myself against his shoulder and closed my eyes. This is enough, I'd thought. I didn't know yet that enough was about to stop being true. Ryan brought it up casually, the way you mentioned needing to buy milk or remembering to pay a bill. "Maybe I should finally meet your family." We were making dinner, pasta, his favorite, and he'd said it while stirring the sauce, not even looking at me. I'd paused mid-chop, surprised but pleased. We'd been together almost 2 years. He'd met my parents briefly at a holiday party, but never in a real, intentional way. Never Hannah. "Yeah?" I'd smiled. "You sure you're ready for that chaos?" "How bad can it be?" He'd grinned, tasting the sauce from the wooden spoon. "Hannah's intense," I'd warned, but fondly. "She'll interrogate you about everything." "I can handle intense." He'd said it like a good boyfriend would, like meeting family was the next logical step. Like he was invested in building something that included all of me, not just the parts that fit easily into his life. I'd kissed his shoulder, happy. "Okay, I'll set something up." He'd smiled and gone back to cooking. I hadn't noticed anything off, just a boyfriend doing what boyfriends do. Being present, being interested, being mine. The highway hummed beneath us, that steady white noise that makes long drives feel meditative. Ryan drove while I scrolled through my phone, half planning the weekend, half reading random articles. "So your sister's a nurse?" Ryan asked. "ER nurse, she loves it, says it's chaotic but meaningful." He'd nodded, eyes on the road. "That's intense work." "Yeah, she's good at it though. Really good." Silence for a moment. Then, "What's she like, personality-wise?" I'd thought about it. Confident, funny, she doesn't take herself too seriously, but she's incredibly competent. People just gravitate toward her. "Sounds like you." I'd smiled. "We're pretty different, actually. She's more outgoing. I'm the quiet one." "Hard to imagine you as the quiet one." Another pause. Then, "Does she look like you?" The question had felt normal at the time, just curiosity, just a boyfriend trying to picture the weekend ahead. "A little," I'd said. "Same eyes, she's taller, better style." Ryan had laughed. "I doubt that." I'd reached over and squeezed his hand, grateful for the compliment. Looking back, I should have noticed. He'd asked about Hannah 3 times during that drive. Not once, several times. But I hadn't been counting. Hannah opened the door in scrubs, hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking exactly like someone who'd just finished a 12-hour shift. "You made it." She'd hugged me tight, then stepped back to look at Ryan. "So you're the famous Ryan." "Guilty," he'd said, extending his hand. Hannah had shaken it, smiling. Come in. I'm a disaster, but the house is clean." Ryan's smile had frozen for half a second. I'd caught it, barely, before returning full force. "You're fine," he'd said. We'd followed her inside. The house smelled like coffee and something baking. Hannah's dog had bounded over, tail wagging aggressively. "Ignore Cooper, he's needy," Hannah had said, already moving toward the kitchen. Ryan had crouched to pet the dog, and I'd watched Hannah glance back, amused. "He's cute," she'd said to me quietly. "I know. Good job." I'd smiled, relieved. First impressions mattered, and Hannah's approval, though she'd never admit it, mattered to me more than almost anyone's. Ryan had stood, following us into the kitchen. "Can I help with anything?" he'd offered. "Such a gentleman," Hannah had teased. "I like him already." And Ryan had smiled, wide, genuine, too wide maybe. But I'd missed it. Hannah leaned against the counter, talking about her shift. A car accident, 3 broken ribs, 1 screaming toddler who'd swallowed a coin. She told stories the way she did everything, vividly, with her hands, making even the stressful parts sound almost funny. Ryan listened. Really listened. The way he used to listen to me when we first started dating, leaning forward slightly, nodding, asking follow-up questions. "Do you ever get used to the chaos?" he'd asked. "You learn to work inside it," Hannah had said. "Some people panic. I just focus." "That's impressive," Hannah had shrugged. "It's just the job." But Ryan had kept watching her like she'd said something profound. I'd been cutting vegetables for dinner, half listening, half focused on not slicing my finger. "Emily's the same way," Hannah had added, "calm under pressure. It's a family trait." Ryan had glanced at me then. "Yeah, she is." But his tone had felt different. Polite rather than admiring. I'd noticed but hadn't named it yet. Just a small, uncomfortable flutter in my chest that I'd pushed away. Hannah had shifted the conversation, asking Ryan about his work. And he'd answered, still leaning against the counter, still watching her. Hannah made a joke about hospital cafeteria food, something about mystery meat and questionable jello, and I'd laughed. But Ryan had already been laughing, louder, longer. I'd looked over, still smiling, and caught the tail end of his expression. Open. Delighted. The way he used to look at me. Hannah had moved on, pulling something from the oven, talking about her neighbor's terrible parking job. Ryan had stayed engaged, chuckling at the right moments, adding comments. I'd gone quiet, not intentionally, just there hadn't been space. The conversation had momentum, and I wasn't part of it. I was adjacent, present but not included. Hannah hadn't noticed. She was just being herself, warm, funny, effortlessly social. Ryan hadn't noticed either, or if he hadn't cared. I'd set the table in silence, listening to them talk, feeling something small and cold settle in my stomach. "It's nothing," I'd told myself. "They're just getting along." That's good, that's what you wanted. But the tightness in my chest said something else. I'd ignored it, pushed it down, smiled when Hannah asked if I was okay. "Just tired," I'd said. And maybe I was. Or maybe I'd just started disappearing. Dinner was fine, normal, nothing dramatic. But I'd realized something sitting there, passing dishes, refilling glasses. I was watching instead of being. Watching Ryan laugh at Hannah's stories. Watching him ask questions about her life, her job, her opinions on things I'd never heard him ask me about. Watching Hannah be effortlessly engaging while I sat quiet, trying to find a way back into the conversation that didn't feel forced. I wasn't excluded, exactly. When I spoke, they listened. But the energy always drifted back to the two of them. Ryan and Hannah talking about burnout, his at work, hers at the hospital. Finding common ground I didn't share. I'd stirred my pasta, appetite fading. Hannah had looked over at one point. "You okay, Em?" "Fine." Ryan had glanced at me too, briefly, before turning back to Hannah. "So what do you do when a shift's been really bad?" And Hannah had answered, and Ryan had nodded. And I'd sat there feeling like a guest at my own dinner. Not because anyone was cruel. Not because I was ignored. Just because the space between them had become more interesting than anything I had to offer. And I didn't know how to compete with that. They were talking about exhaustion, the kind that comes from jobs that demand everything. "Sometimes I just sit in my car for 10 minutes after a shift," Hannah said, "just to decompress before going inside." Ryan nodded. "I do the same thing. People think it's weird, but..." "It's not weird," Hannah interrupted. "It's survival." Exactly. They'd shared a look, understanding, connection. I'd stirred my coffee too long, the spoon clinking against the ceramic in a rhythm that felt too loud. I didn't have stories like theirs. My work was meaningful, but different, quieter, less dramatic. Sitting with teenagers who were struggling, helping them navigate anxiety and family problems and the general chaos of being young. Important work. But not the kind that translated into gripping dinner conversation. Ryan had never asked me to sit in my car after hard days. He'd never seemed interested in that kind of emotional labor. But here he was, leaning forward, fully engaged, treating Hannah's exhaustion like it mattered more than mine ever had. I'd set down my spoon. "I'm gonna grab more water," I'd said, standing. Neither of them had looked up. I'd stood at the sink, staring out the window, wondering when I'd become background noise. Later, driving back to the hotel, Ryan had been quiet. Content. The kind of silence that comes from a good evening. I'd waited for him to mention me, to say something about how nice it was to meet my family, to see where I came from. Instead, "Your sister's really confident." It sounded like admiration, like he'd discovered something rare. "Yeah," I'd said carefully, "she is. She's got this Presence, you know? I can see why people like her. I'd stared out the window, watching streetlights blur past. She's great, I'd agreed, voice flat. Ryan hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. It's cool that you two are close, he'd added. We are. He'd reached over and squeezed my knee, a gesture meant to be affectionate, but it had felt perfunctory, an afterthought. Like he'd remembered I was there and thought he should acknowledge it. I'd looked at his hand on my leg and felt nothing. No warmth, no connection. Just the weight of something that used to mean more than it did now. Yeah, I'd said again. It's cool. We'd driven the rest of the way in silence, and for the first time, I'd wondered if he was thinking about me at all. I told myself I was tired, that I was reading too much into normal interactions, that people are allowed to connect with other people without it meaning anything. Ryan liked Hannah. So what? Hannah was likable. I shrugged it off, pushed it down, reminded myself that insecurity was unattractive and I was being silly. We'd gotten ready for bed in the hotel room. Ryan had scrolled through his phone while I brushed my teeth. Today was nice, he'd said. Yeah. Your sister's cool. You mentioned. He'd looked up, frowning slightly. You okay? Fine, just tired. You've been quiet, have I? He'd studied me for a moment, then gone back to his phone. Maybe you should get more sleep. I'd climbed into bed, turning away from him. He'd followed a few minutes later, wrapping an arm around me out of habit. I'd lain there, eyes open, trying to identify the feeling sitting heavy in my chest. Not anger, not jealousy exactly, just a quiet, creeping awareness that something had shifted. And I couldn't shift it back. The next day, Hannah had come over to my parents' house for brunch, the whole family together. I'd watched Ryan across the room while Hannah explained something with her hands, animated, engaged, fully herself. And Ryan had watched too, not casually, not politely. He'd watched the way you watch something you want to understand completely. His eyes had tracked her movements. His expression had been open, focused, almost hungry. I'd seen it clearly then. The thing I'd been trying not to name, it wasn't admiration. It wasn't friendly interest. It was attraction. Raw and obvious and entirely inappropriate. My stomach had dropped. Hannah had laughed at something our dad said, and Ryan had smiled reflexively, like her joy was contagious. I'd looked away, my hands shaking slightly. This is happening, I'd thought. This is real. Ryan hadn't noticed me watching. He'd been too absorbed in her. And Hannah. God, Hannah had been completely oblivious. Just being herself, unaware of the attention she was drawing. Or maybe she'd known. Maybe she'd felt it too and was trying to ignore it. I didn't know which was worse. Hannah's tone changed after that. Not dramatically, just small shifts. The way she'd step back when Ryan got too close. The way she'd redirect conversation when it started feeling too intimate. She'd pull me into discussions more deliberately. What do you think, Em? Even when the question didn't really need my input. She was trying to rebalance something that had tipped. At one point, she'd caught my eye across the room and given me a look I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or apology. Later, when Ryan had gone outside to take a call, Hannah had touched my arm. You good? Yeah. Why? She'd hesitated, just checking. I'm fine. But we'd both known I wasn't, and she'd known why. Hannah had pulled back physically after that, created distance, stood farther away when Ryan was in the room. She wasn't encouraging anything. She wasn't flirting or playing games. She was just existing. And somehow, that was enough. Ryan noticed her withdrawing. I'd seen the confusion on his face when she'd excused herself early. Is she okay? He'd asked me. She's fine. Just tired. He'd nodded, but he'd looked disappointed. And that disappointment had told me everything I needed to know. Ryan forgot about my meeting. I'd mentioned it twice, a presentation I was giving at work about student mental health resources, something I'd been preparing for weeks. Good luck today, he'd texted that morning. But when I'd called him afterward, excited because it had gone well, he'd sounded confused. Wait, that was today? I told you, twice. Oh right, sorry, I forgot. How'd it go? I'd given him the short version. He'd made appropriate noises, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. Later that week, he'd remembered Hannah's night shift without prompting. Isn't Hannah working tonight? He'd asked while we were watching TV. I don't know, probably. That's rough, the overnight shifts? Yeah. He'd gone quiet, thoughtful, like he was imagining her exhaustion with more empathy than he'd shown for my actual accomplishments. I'd stared at the screen, not seeing anything. The imbalance was becoming impossible to ignore. What I didn't register. What Hannah did, or might be doing, occupied his thoughts. "I'm going to bed," I'd said, standing. "Already? It's early. I'm tired." He'd let me go without protest. I'd lain in the dark, listening to the TV through the wall, wondering when I'd become forgettable. We'd been out with friends when someone had made a joke comparing me to Hannah. "You two are so different," Ryan had laughed. Too loud, too genuine. The table had gone briefly quiet, sensing the edge in the comment. I hadn't laughed. "Different how?" I'd asked, keeping my voice light. Ryan had shrugged, oblivious. "Matt, just energy, I guess. Personality." "And that's funny?" "What? No, I just meant..." He'd realized too late that he'd misstepped. "It's not a bad thing. You're both great. Just different." "Right." Our friend had changed the subject quickly, but the damage was done. Ryan had reached for my hand under the table. I'd let him hold it, but hadn't squeezed back. Later, walking to the car, he'd tried again. "I didn't mean anything by that." "I know. You're upset." "I'm fine. You don't seem fine." I'd stopped walking. "Do you think about her a lot?" "Who?" "Hannah." His face had done something complicated. "Why would you ask that?" "Just answer." "I mean, no, not really. We just met." But he'd hesitated, just a second, just long enough for me to know he was lying. "Okay," I'd said, and we'd walked the rest of the way in silence. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, listening to Ryan breathe beside me. His arm was draped across my waist, familiar, automatic, a position we'd fallen into 1,000 times. But it felt wrong now, heavy instead of comforting. I tried to name what I was feeling. Jealousy felt too small. Betrayal felt too dramatic. Nothing had actually happened. But something was broken. Something I couldn't fix by trying harder or being better or ignoring the signs. Ryan shifted in his sleep, pulling me closer. I'd wanted to pull away, to create space between us. To stop pretending physical proximity meant emotional connection. But I'd stayed still, frozen in place by the weight of a relationship that was ending, even though no one had said so yet. The room was dark and quiet, the kind of silence that should feel peaceful. Instead, it felt suffocating. I'd thought about Hannah, about how she hadn't done anything wrong, how she'd tried to create distance, to not be the thing that came between us. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done, not because of what she'd done, because of what Ryan had stopped doing. Seeing me, choosing me, wanting me. I'd closed my eyes, knowing I wouldn't sleep, waiting for morning. I said it softly, carefully, while we were making breakfast. "I think we need to talk about what's happening." Ryan had paused mid-pour, coffee pot hovering over his mug. "What's happening?" "With you and Hannah." He'd set down the pot, his expression closing off. "Nothing's happening with me and Hannah. You're different around her." "Different how?" "More engaged, more interested, more alive." Ryan had sighed. The kind of sigh that said I was being difficult. That said he was tired of this conversation before it had even started. I just met her. We got along. That's it." "It's more than that." "It's not. You forget things about me but remember details about her. You light up when she's around. You compare us." "I don't." "You do," I'd interrupted, "and I'm not imagining it." Ryan had leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Defensive. "So what do you want me to do? Never talk to your sister again?" "I want you to want me the way you want her." The words had hung there, raw, undeniable. Ryan's face had softened slightly, but not enough. "I do want you." But he'd said it like an obligation, like something he should feel rather than something he did. And we'd both known it was a lie. "You're overthinking this," Ryan had said, his voice flat and tired. "Am I?" "Yes. You're making something out of nothing." "It doesn't feel like nothing." He'd run his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I can't help what you feel, Emily, but I haven't done anything wrong." Technically true. He hadn't cheated, hadn't lied, exactly. Hadn't crossed any obvious line, but he'd stopped being present, stopped choosing me, stopped seeing me as someone worth his full attention. And somehow, that felt worse than a clean betrayal. "Maybe you haven't," I'd said quietly, "but something's changed. People get along with other people. That's normal. Not like this." "Like what?" "Like you've already checked out of us." Ryan had gone very still. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" He'd looked at me then, really looked, and I'd seen something flicker in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. "I don't know what you want from me," he'd said finally. I want you to care about me more than you care about impressing my sister." He'd flinched. "I'm not trying to impress her." "Then what are you trying to do?" He hadn't answered, just stood there, defensive and cornered and unwilling to admit what we both already knew. The conversation had ended without resolution. Just silence and distance and the growing certainty that we were done. Hannah had called me 2 days later. "Can we talk?" We'd met at a coffee shop near her apartment, neutral territory. She'd looked tired, worried. "This isn't okay," she'd said without preamble. "I know, and it's not me. I know that too." Hannah had reached across the table, taking my hand. "I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. I know, but it's happening anyway." I'd nodded, throat tight. "He looks at me." Hannah had continued carefully. "The way he should be looking at you, and I hate it. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you." We'd sat there, two sisters caught in something neither of us had created, but both of us had to navigate. "I told him I needed space," Hannah had said, "that I couldn't be around him right now, that it wasn't appropriate." "What did he say?" "He said I was overreacting, that we were just friends." I'd laughed bitterly. "He said the same thing to me." "Emily," Hannah had squeezed my hand, "you deserve better than this. I know. So what are you going to do?" I'd looked at her, my sister, my friend, someone who'd never meant to become the thing that broke my relationship. "I don't know yet," I'd said, but I was starting to. We'd gone to a family dinner the following weekend, my parents' anniversary. I'd almost canceled, but avoiding it would have required explanations I wasn't ready to give. Ryan had been on his best behavior, attentive to me, polite to everyone, careful not to engage too much with Hannah. But when my dad had asked a question about hospital funding cuts, Ryan had sided with Hannah's perspective before I'd even finished mine. "Hannah's right," he'd said. "The system is broken at a structural level." I'd been mid-sentence, literally still talking. Ryan hadn't noticed. He turned to Hannah, animated. "The way you described it last time." My chest had tightened. My mom had shot me a concerned look across the table. I'd excused myself, gone to the bathroom, stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face had looked pale, tired, like I'd been fighting something for too long. When I'd come back, Ryan and Hannah had been in separate conversations. Hannah deliberately engaging with our mom. Ryan talking to my dad, creating distance, being appropriate. But the damage was already done. Ryan had interrupted me to agree with her. Had valued her perspective over mine without thinking. Had made it clear, in front of my family, where his attention really was. I'd sat down and stayed quiet for the rest of dinner. No one had asked if I was okay. They already knew I wasn't. We'd been driving home when it had slipped out. "You used to be more like her." Ryan had said it absently, like he was just thinking out loud. I'd gone very still. "What?" He'd realized his mistake immediately. "I didn't mean..." "What did you mean?" "Just when we first met, you were more outgoing, more, I don't know, spontaneous. And now I'm not? You're different. We both are. People change." But the comparison had been made, and it had been clear what kind of change he preferred. "So I'm not enough anymore," I'd said quietly, "because I'm not like Hannah." "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." Ryan had gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You're twisting my words." "Am I?" "I just meant, I miss how things used to be, between us. And you think being more like my sister would fix that?" "No. God, Emily, you're making this into something it's not." But he'd shown his hand, revealed the thought he'd probably been having for weeks without saying. That I'd somehow failed to be the person he wanted. That Hannah represented something I used to be but could no longer access. That I'd become a disappointment by being myself. The rest of the drive had been silent. And for the first time, I'd felt something other than hurt. I'd felt clarity. I went quiet after that, not angry, just clear. Ryan noticed the shift, the way I stopped engaging with his excuses, stopped defending myself, stopped trying to fix something that was already broken. "You're being distant," he'd said one evening. "Am I?" "Yeah, it's like you're not even here." I'd looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing but exhausted certainty. Maybe I'm not. What does that mean? It means I'm tired, Ryan. Tired of competing with someone I'll never be. Tired of feeling like I'm not enough. Tired of watching you wish I was someone else. He'd started to protest, but I'd held up my hand. "Don't. Please don't tell me I'm imagining it, or overreacting, or being insecure. I know what I've seen, and I'm done pretending it's okay. Ryan had gone pale. So what are you saying? I'm saying I deserve someone who chooses me, who sees me, who doesn't spend half their energy wishing I was more like my sister. I don't wish that. You do. You said it yourself. He'd fallen silent then, unable to deny what we both knew was true. I'd turned away, feeling strangely calm. The anger had burned out. All that was left was acceptance. We were done. We just hadn't made it official yet. He'd tried to have the talk late that night, after hours of tense silence, after we'd both avoided the inevitable. I need to be honest with you, Ryan had said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I'd stayed where I was, arms crossed. Okay. I am attracted to Hannah. He'd said it like weather, like something unavoidable, like a fact that existed independent of choice or consequence. I know, but I haven't acted on it. I wouldn't. Does that make it better? Ryan had looked at me helplessly. I don't know what you want from me. I'm being honest. I want you to want me more than you want her. I do. No, you don't. And admitting you're attracted to her doesn't change the fact that you've spent weeks making me feel invisible, making me compete for attention I shouldn't have to earn. I never asked you to compete. You didn't have to. You just stopped choosing me. Ryan had dropped his head into his hands. I don't know how to fix this. You can't. He'd looked up, desperate. So that's it? We're just done? I'd felt something crack open in my chest. Not heartbreak. Just release. Yeah, I'd said softly, we're done. And saying it out loud had felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for weeks. I'd started packing the next morning, slowly, carefully, folding clothes with deliberate precision. Ryan had sat on the bed watching, stunned but not fighting. Where will you go? He'd asked. My place. I kept the lease. I didn't know that. I know. We'd been living at his apartment for months, but some part of me, the part that had seen this coming, had never fully moved in. I'd packed my books, my kitchen supplies, the things that had made his space feel partly mine. Ryan had helped at one point, handing me a sweater I'd forgotten in his closet. I really didn't mean for this to happen, he'd said. I know. I do care about you. I know that too. Then why does it feel like you hate me? I'd stopped folding, looked at him directly. I don't hate you, Ryan. I'm just tired of loving someone who stopped seeing me. He'd had no answer for that. We'd finished packing in silence. He'd helped me carry boxes to my car. We'd stood in the parking lot, awkward and sad and relieved. I'm sorry, he'd said finally. Me too. And that was it. No grand farewell, no final argument, just two people acknowledging that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome distraction. Ryan had asked if we could fix it, if there was any chance. We'd been standing by my car, the last box loaded, the sun setting behind his building. I don't think so, I'd said honestly. Why not? Because I already know what happens next. You'll try for a while, be more attentive, more present. But eventually, you'll resent me for making you perform. And I'll resent you for needing to be reminded to choose me. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's true. He'd looked at me then, really looked, and I'd seen him see me for the first time in weeks. But it was too late. The seeing came too late. I wish things were different, he'd said. So do I. Can we at least stay friends? I'd thought about it, about whether friendship was possible with someone who'd made me feel this small. Maybe eventually, I'd said, but not right now. He'd nodded, understanding finally that some distances can't be closed. I'd gotten in my car, started the engine, looked at him one last time through the window. He'd looked lost, sad, but not devastated. And that had told me everything I needed to know. He'd miss me, but he wouldn't break, and neither would I. I'd stood alone in my apartment that first night, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. The space was quiet, empty in a way that should have felt lonely. But it didn't. It felt kind. The silence wrapped around me like something soft, something that didn't demand anything. Didn't compare me to anyone, didn't wish I was different. I'd made tea, sat by the window, watched the city lights flicker on as evening settled. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. I felt like I was coming back. Ryan would probably reach out to Hannah eventually. Or he wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my concern anymore. Hannah had texted earlier, "You okay?" I'd replied, "Getting there." And I was. The relief was quiet, but real. The kind that comes from finally stopping something that hurt. I'd lost my boyfriend slowly, quietly, while he was still holding my hand. But I'd found myself again in the leaving. And that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like freedom.